As many of you may be aware, we work with, grant makers, scholarship providers, associations doing award programs, fellowships, and many people who are doing a combination of all of them, speaker abstracts, you name it. And so while many of the trends and items that we talk about are very generalized, some of which might be very unique to individual organizations, right? So as we kind of dive into today, things like grant reporting and impact measurement, that's obviously very unique to the grantees on the call here today. So if there's other topics or other things that you guys want to chat about, please do let us know. Again, we love to do these very open call for conversation and make them as interactive as possible. So today's main goal is the 8 emerging trends in grant management. That actually has now changed to 9. It's kind of funny. I had a call this morning with an organization, and they had brought up something that I'll show you guys here in just a few minutes. That's now been something that I've talked about now for like 4 or 5 consecutive days, and it's things I hadn't heard a whole lot of beforehand. And so I added it to today's conversation just as a kind of a quick bonus because I do feel it's an emerging trend. So the reason why I want to talk about these items here today, I'll get into an agenda and some of the elements that we're going to talk through, but kind of a quick introduction of who I am and what we do here at Reviewer, and kind of why we are even able to have these types of conversations. So we started a company back in 2012. We did so very much from our own kind of volunteer perspective, working alongside what I call mission-driven organizations. So we are part of the reading committees and selection committees for groups that were doing funding opportunities, so scholarships, grants, investments, you name it. Not to get too deep into the weeds, things started very paper-based. So for those of you on the call today who were more old school paper, pen, pencil processes, that was us. So we had hundreds and hundreds of binders being mailed to our doorstep, and we were tasked with handwriting notes, feedback, scores. We'd mail it back in. We'd meet on the weekends with other committee members, and as a volunteer, it was comprehensive to say the least. Really, though, the straw for us that broke the camel's back was fast forwarding a couple of years, and you start to see a lot of these programs go online. And what that really meant was a wide variety of online tools. Downloading of documents, emails, spreadsheets, built-in web forms, databases, AMSs. That list can go on and on. And as a volunteer, it actually quite a bit more work for us because now we're using like 9 different tools, none of which were really intended for the task at hand. It just addressed elements of a grant process. And so it ended up being a bit more painstaking for us. But then we saw really 2 terrible things start happening. There was one use case where a bunch of applicants who were applying for funding for a very high need program. And they were applying through email with a bunch of attachments. And sure enough, a bunch of them landed in somebody's spam filter. And so a team had actually sat down and they cut checks and awarded funding to find out months and months later that there were highly deserving individuals that didn't get selected in the review process because they weren't even included. I get very passionate when I talk about that story because it's why we exist. We also started to see firsthand review and selection committees who were not having data redacted from them so they could see demographic details or personal identifying information about the candidates, and that led into very unfair bias selection. So again, we went on this war path to build Reviewer because I'm very passionate about these types of things can never happen again. These are mission critical, high impact type of programs that need to be treated as such. So we built Reviewer as an online platform for 2 real purposes. One is operationally speaking, I'm a father now of soon to be 2. I can't be working at 9 o'clock on Wednesday nights and spreadsheets. There's other things my life needs to be focused on. I have to stay hyper efficient. So for you and your teams, how do we help you stay focused on your mission and your vision and the task at hand, and less so downloading of documents and spreadsheets and things like that? But at the end of the day, you make up a small portion of these programs. How do we elevate the experience for the applicants, the review committees, and really everybody else involved? And so that's kind of where Reviewer was born from. We work with thousands of organizations, and this brings us full circle to, today's webinar and the topic at hand, which comes down to the fact that I've seen at this point in time every imaginable workflow that you can probably think of. Some are really, really great, some not so much. But we're also able to identify trends in the space, and I'm not going to get too much deeper into Reviewer, but ultimately, part of our implementation processes and plans isn't just building out and setting up the platform. It's kind of looking holistically at what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what you're doing, what you want to be doing 3 years from now, and then digging into our bag of goodies and features and our portfolio of clients to identify other use cases and ways that people have leveraged our system that was high impact and make you more aware of them. And so every single day I have conversations with mission driven organizations who are doing things differently. And I'm starting to identify a couple common core trends over the last 12 months. And that's really what I want to bring up today. I will in the backdrop showcase reviewer just at a very high level, not necessarily to show all the great things that we can do, more so just how you can visualize these concepts and put them more into practice. So with all that said, we're going to kind of dive into the first topic today, which is going to be reference collection. The reason why I want to bring that up is for many of you, you may not be doing references at all. It's a very common thing within scholarship making, less so in grants, but it is something that I would say, has gone from like a 30% process to now upwards of like 60 to 70% of our grant making clients do some type of letter of support. And the reason why is we have to create some type of way to differentiate one applicant from another. Again, some of these grants might be very need analysis based. Some might be very highly competitive application structures for scientific funding, right? So there's a time and place for all these elements, but since it is becoming a common trend, I want to showcase it for you, but also from a platform perspective, how we collect them may actually be very translatable to other workflows that you may have. As we kind of go there, though, I am also going to show you a quick little bonus, and that was from a conversation I had today around the proper way of collecting applications in the sense of increasing volume and the conversion rates, because generally speaking, you see about a 30% of number of people who may begin or start a grant application that never finish up, right? So how do we identify them and then get them to convert? So with all that said, let's kind of jump into the main point of contact today, which is reference collection. So, traditionally speaking, writing a reference or a letter of support or a support statement is pretty challenging for two reasons. One of which is that applicants will always procrastinate and wait to the very last minute. I'm sure many of you have seen this. So that not only impacts you and them, it impacts the person writing that letter of statement. So, for example, if they're being asked at the very last minute to write something, the time and energy that they're going to put forth is going to be minimal if they even do it to begin with. Also, traditionally speaking, they're hard to write. People being asked to write a reference or a letter of support often have to sit down from scratch, come up with some type of topic, and write it. Where the challenge comes into play is that some people are just better writers than others and are going to put forth different energy levels. And that's not necessarily a fair representation of the applicant or the candidate. It's more so on the person doing the reference. It also creates some discrepancies in your data. So when you go to review these letters of these support testimonials, you're no longer comparing apples to apples because some people just have different topics written about them. Some are better written than others. It takes more time for your team to read through them. So instead of doing it that way, why don't we kind of shift this a little bit and instead still leverage letters of support, but drop the letter and instead offer templates. And I'll show this to you, but basically we want our references or our supporters to come in and fill out a series of questions. Like, what are the 3 to 5 things you want them to talk about that particular candidate that now stays very consistent? So that means when you go to review these submissions, every single candidate has the exact same data associated with them. It's also nice too because at some point you're going to do a review and judging process, typically speaking. And so you can also have like a built-in score sheet on your references that will rank candidates based off of leadership, grant writing, all these different types of things. And then you can incorporate that automatically into your score sheet. So with all that said, you're probably wondering, well, how do we collect these? And also, I opened up a potential challenge for you in the sense that you now have all these externally submitted reference requests. How do you know like what their progress percentages are? How do you ensure they're going to get completed? Things like that. So with all that said, let's take a quick peek at what that looks like in Reviewer. So jumping into the system, I do want to talk at a very high level about that bonus topic, which is grant nominations. So I had a conversation this morning, and again, I've had this now 4 or 5 straight days, where we talk about how within Reviewer, the grantee can save, they can log out, they can come back later. We can track their progress. You can send automation and built-in reminder messages to finish up their grant applications, not just the front-end application, but also like the long-term grant reporting templates, all those additional deliverables that we need from them. And these people have said, that's great. We definitely have that concern, but also we have these really high impact programs. We just need more volume because we are providing so much impact to people. And historically speaking, if you are coming across a grant opportunity or a scholarship and you've got somebody else in mind for it, you're going to copy the link to the form or to the website and you're going to send it off to them. And that still very well might happen. The problem is you as an organization have no idea that's happening. So A lot of our clients who are now using Reviewer will have some type of like submission process that's built in that says, hey, are you applying for this grant or do you want to share it with somebody else that you think might be a great fit? And if they choose somebody else, and again, I can't guarantee people are going to do this, they still might copy and paste the link. But for those that do this, we now have some really powerful data for follow-ups. So what does that look like? So in this use case, I got Jim. Jim is an individual who wants to submit this for somebody else. So Jim just simply puts in who he is. I'm gonna go ahead and move the screen share out of the way a little bit. So Jim puts in who he is. He's gonna put in who he believes is a strong fit for this grant. So in this use case, we got Michael. And then maybe you also want to offer a quick little note that's optional, like why do you think Michael should apply to this grant? This is also a nice component because when you go to do a review and selection, I talked about how do you differentiate. This is almost like a letter of support in itself, right? So you have Michael, who is the person applying for the grant, all of his deliverables. But now you have this like impact statement that was submitted on behalf of Michael on why they thought he should even join this to begin with. So what's going to end up happening in this example is that was very, very simple for Jim, the nominator. Now Michael gets a very quick and easy email notification that says, "Hey, Michael, you're nominated for Jim for a prestigious, grant program. Click here to begin your grant application." So now things become super cool because now you have two different kind of core metrics. You've got a bunch of people who nominated somebody else for a grant. So you can start to leverage automation, follow-ups. You can follow up directly with the person nominated and with Jim to help him get Michael to submit. And then now you've got Michael himself. So Michael comes into the platform and he fills out his grant application. And we can also measure his progress percentage. So you can also send him email reminders. So for all you marketers on the call, we have two different funnels and two different kind of conversion metrics that we can look at. So really high impact. Now, to get into the thing about references, so just kind of get there, very typical grant application form. This is a particular grant we work with where, it's an organization that's being funded. So obviously, who are you as an organization, your EINs, your tax ID numbers, what's your mission statement, ultimately, like how much funding are you seeking assistance for? Then you get into all of your short answers and your content. So what's the project? How much money do you need? Tell us more about your budgets. How are you going to utilize the funds? This is some things that we'll get into later on measuring impact. But at the end of the day, if we're going to cut you a check, how do you, as a grantee, define success? How can we help hold you accountable? How sustainable is this? All the things that you're probably already collecting. As they progress through the grant application, you're going to get into things like file uploads. I'll also preview this for you later on. I don't want you to have to download budgets and spreadsheets. You can actually physically embed them in our platform. But then we get into the actual letters of support, and this is kind of where I'm going to pause here. So, what's going to happen in a platform like Reviewer, ideally, is Michael, the grantee, is going to put in who he wants to write a letter of recommendation or a support request. So in this example, I got Dwight. Dwight is the one. And so Dwight actually gets an email notification that says, hey, Dwight, Michael's asked that you write a letter on his behalf. Click here to do so. And I should stop saying letter. It should be a template, right? So Dwight gets this email. He or she will then click on a link, and that brings Dwight directly into Reviewer, where again, we avoid reference letters. Now you can absolutely still do an upload. You can make it optional, but instead you can ask Michael, like, or Dwight, "Hey, what are the three things?" And you can actually have question prompts, almost like essays. So you lower the barrier for Dwight. He just answers a series of questions. In this example, we also have a pretty cool built-in score sheet that will auto tabulate for you. So Dwight comes in, very easily answers a series of questions. And then you as an operations team are probably wondering, okay, well, now what's happening? So you get this dashboard, and I'm not going to get too deep into operations today. And this is going to show you how many outstanding support or references have been requested, what their progress percentages are, and then the ability to actually kind of dive in and look at it. You can also see another tab over here called grant reporting, kind of a nice little feature as well, because your program is multi-phase, multi-step. So we can kind of get into that in a future conversation. So now what happens? Well, I can open up Michael. Michael was my grantee, and I can see he has got a list of deliverables that were submitted, one of which was a reference letter. So now I can just simply click into it, and then it'll embed itself right in Reviewer. So again, I never have to leave the platform. I just consolidated a bunch of data submitted by Michael and on behalf of Michael into one centralized hub. So really powerful, great things are happening here. From a file upload perspective, just kind of showcase, yes, you can still do letters. And again, they all get embedded into our platform. So you don't have to worry about downloading, exporting, opening it up into other tools, coming back in later on. So Let's kind of to move on. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is a very common topic now, and it's a polarizing one called AI content detection. There was a study done in November, specifically within university systems for individuals doing scholarship applications. But I know for a fact, because we see it on a daily basis, it's happening with grant writing as well. So as a organization having people fill out grant applications, you're asking them to answer a series of questions. How are the funds going to be utilized? Tell us more about your project. Um, People are 100% leveraging the assistance of tools like ChatGPT, Claude, all these other AI tools out there. And they're using it to help write these statements. It could be essays, it could be the grant writing templates, it could be grant reporting templates. They just type in their numbers and it'll spit out the results for them. They're becoming quite robust. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I would highly expect not only will people use these tools more and more, but also we are going to promote them, right? They're tools that will make our lives easier, and that's okay. But there is a big difference between using ChatGPT to write a framework about my project versus copying and pasting a prompt and then copying and pasting the answer back in. Also, sometimes plagiarism becomes a concern. Am I seeking funding for something very similar to somebody else? And can I just copy and paste their grant applications that are publicly available into my form? If that's the case, we have to know what's going on. So our goal here at Reviewer, and we're launching this here in the next couple months. It's going to be called Sidekick. It's an AI detection tool that integrates with quite a few different sources out there. Think of it like a credit score. You can't just check one source. You got to check multiple and then provide you the results. We're not here to make decisions for you. We're not here to eliminate people. We just want you as an organization to be aware, as these applications are becoming more and more robust. Are applicants leveraging the assistance of tools like ChatGPT? And if so, to what extent? The idea is that you can help identify thresholds. So on average, if somebody fills out an application, it's a 25% utilization score. That's fine because that's your threshold. That's the common average. When you start to run into problems is if you have got grantees who are at the 80, 90, 100% level, okay, now we may need to dig into them deeper. It also might be one of those things that we don't care about, but before we cut funds or do final selections, maybe we just do a quick little detection at that point in time just to ensure. And then if at that point we catch them, we can always kind of dig into our honorable mentions or kind of repeat the review process. So just to quickly showcase what that could look like for you, again, it's going to be a very powerful tool and reviewer that's going to change a lot over the next probably 8 months. Just as we see more and more people utilizing it and how you want to interact with it, we will change it with you. Our commitment is to be at the forefront of this and be evolving. So at a very high level, again, two things are going to happen. Number one is that we're going to show you a listing of all of your grantees and then two different columns. One's going to be a detection score for AI utilization. The other is going to be for plagiarism detection. The goal here is that you can very quickly filter and visualize what those thresholds look like and then start to dive into the data deeper. So for you, what I would do is I'll open up an applicant, and then it's going to show me on those question by question prompts what the detection score looked like. So I can actually open it up, and it'll show me in real time the content that we ran it against, how much of it was written by the assistance of AI, and how much of it was written by a human. And that's how you can kind of get to some of those scores. From a plagiarism perspective, it's actually going to go ahead and do a separate score for you. You can open it up, and then this is a bit more comprehensive because it's going to show you exactly what we caught as plagiarized content, and then how plagiarized was it? Was it a verbatim identical match? Was it paraphrased? What was it? Because it was plagiarized, excuse me, we can probably find where it was plagiarized from because it's all publicly available data, and we can actually show you the source as well. So again, polarizing conversation here. Some of it will be relevant to some of you, some of it won't be. Just want to kind of make you aware that it is a trend that we're starting to see. So that's why it came up in conversation here for us today. The next thing I want to look at is creating a fair, non-biased, and compliant selection. So this really is, in my opinion, the bread and butter of why we're talking today, and it's why we built the platform. It's what I'm very, very passionate about. You are a mission-driven organization awarding funding to people to change their lives or change society. If that's the case, we have to make sure that we give it the attention it deserves and that proper applicants get the chance that they deserve. I can't reiterate enough how passionate we are about this. So what's going to end up happening is To create these kind of compliant, fair, non-biased selection processes, there's two core components that come into play. Number one is we have to create an ecosystem that ensures that the applicants are properly being assigned out to the right individuals to review them. And number two, those individuals aren't seeing information that may cloudy their judgment. So there's so many ways to create these review processes and workflows. I'm not going to get into that today. If you're an organization that offers multiple different types of grants, that's one way you can categorize them. If you're a grant maker that offers grants, say for example, like, individuals of need, it could be for housing, it could be for utilities, it could be for healthcare, it could be for food. That's one way to categorize it. Many of you may have multiple phases of review. So applications come in, you go through a vetting process, you then go through a judging and selection process. It goes off to the board for final selection. Again, there are countless ways of doing this. With that said, it doesn't really matter because one thing I want to do is that number one is that you need to be aware of what the workload capacities are of your review team. We have so many organizations that have some type of review team that reviews every single grant application. And if you're a small grant provider, that's okay. The challenge is when you have 20, 30, 40, 50, 156,000 submissions, your team physically can't review all of them. And I don't really care how much we think that they can. There's some pretty clear data that backs up that after roughly 20 or so grant applications at a given time, their workload capacity starts to really significantly drop off. They're giving numbers 18, 19, and 20 less energy than numbers 1, 2, and 3. That in itself is going to cause a problem. So how do we combat this? So the idea is to somehow create some type of randomization as well as equal distribution to your team. But the only way that this can work is if there's some type of data to kind of identify what those workload capacities look like. So if you're not currently surveying or working with your review teams to identify how long does it take you to fill out grant scorecards, how many submissions do you feel comfortable reviewing, then this all goes out the window. Once we know what that looks like, though, then we can start to create these review phases where we do random distribution. The second piece of that is the redaction of data. Again, this is very specific to your programming, but we want to make sure that we're not having evaluators whose judgment is being cloudy by things like who people are, demographic backgrounds, if they know them personally or not. So generally speaking, if you consider something to be PAI, or if you're wondering if it is, it probably is err on the side of caution. Obviously, things like name, email addresses, that's very easy to redact. If you want to be really comprehensive, we got to move short form content out of file uploads and into open-ended text fields into a platform like Reviewer. So that way, when you go to do redaction, it's significantly easier. I also want to note that these review processes can be comprehensive, and so if you're collecting information for record keeping purposes, don't show it to the review team if it's not specific to the selection. It just overwhelms them. So again, show them only what they need. Now, this is a critical component, which is the next piece of this conversation, which is going to be the utilization of what I call normalization reporting. So what's going to happen is anytime you do a random distribution of submissions to a team, it implies that not every applicant gets reviewed by the same people. So what happens now if you've got some evaluators that on average are a bit more harsh as they score or a bit easier? That has a direct impact on the overall results. So we'll come back to that. So how do we handle these workflows? How do you visualize that? So at least in a platform like Reviewer, you've got these really cool tools called workflows or these bucketing systems. And again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds today on how to structure this because it's going to be very specific to your desired process. But at its core, you create these buckets. So in this example, I have kind of two different formats, one of which is, 5 different types of grants being provided. The other is phases and workflows. So the general thought here is that applicants who are applying will pick what grant they're submitting for. So in this example, I got the Lennox Wilder grant. The next step is to fill up that bucket with a review team. So I'm going to go ahead and assign this out to Simon, Paula, and Mark. When they come into reviewer, they're only going to see the grantee applicants in the bucket that they be given access to. Now, you can also have like what I call like a judge manager, so a dedicated individual who's overseeing their own kind of committee members. And this is great from a data security perspective because now we're limiting that number of people to only the submissions in their bucket. Now, if your team is reviewing multiple grants or multiple phases of review, that's fine. You just give them access to multiple buckets. What I really want to get to here, though, is when I open these workflows up, it's going to show me two different lists. One is a listing of all of the applicants in that bucket, and then the other is the potential review committee. That potential is the key word because just because they're in the bucket doesn't always imply that they're going to review everybody. So the way that I want this to work is I can take all of my applicants and I want to do two quick things. Number one is I want to figure out how many reviews each evaluator is comfortable submitting. And I also want to work backwards to figure out, well, how many individual reviews does an applicant need to make sure that we have a good reflection of the quality of the submission. So in that example, maybe we say, well, I want my review team to get no more than 20, but no less than 15. But you also have to ensure that every grantee is reviewed exactly 5 times, either no more, no less, or maybe no more than 6 times, no less than four. So in reviewer, again, taking human judgment out of this, I can bulk select people and I can actually type in those parameters. I can physically type in give each applicant no more than 6 evaluators and no less than four. And then the system will in real time divvy it out to your staff in an equal random fashion. Now, if you need to, if an evaluator recuses themselves, or if you want to have more control over this, that's great. You can actually, on a per person, individually uncheck and reassign them back out. So there's that kind of component to it. The next thing I want to look at is actually two things. One is the redaction of data. And if I jump back over to my presentation, we do have a slide that I'm not going to talk about, but I'll share this afterwards called the broadening of the criteria. Instead, I'm just going to show this to you and kind of address it as we go. So what does that mean? When a review committee member comes into reviewer, they will basically get a menu, and that menu is going to be a listing of all of the grantees that that person is supposed to be evaluating. Again, if you're redacting of data, which I highly suggest, things like your name won't show up here. It's just going to be an ID number. So the evaluator simply clicks into the individual and they get a split screen. So half of their page is what I call a profile, and the other half is your selection tool. Now, again, not to get too deep into reviewer, the selection tool is completely custom. I do want to kind of point out though that as you can see here, if I scroll down, it is independent. So the team can kind of side by side read through grant applications, look at deliverables, look at files, and fill out their score sheets. Again, typically a score sheet won't just be math. It's going to be a combination of like question, score, comment, question, score, comment, things like that. But the reason why I want to bring that up is you can see here there is no point values being associated. This is that trend that I talked about where um, evaluators get very bogged down in numbers, and we want to make sure that we lower the barrier for them and keep them hyper focused on the task at hand. So I think the proper way and the trend of structuring a scorecard is to align the questions with your mission, your vision, and what you're looking for in a grantee. From there, instead of asking your evaluators to assign a point value, because they're going to start to say, well, what's the difference between like a 16 and a 17, right? And it seems like a small detail, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. It ultimately changes the results of a program. So treat it like a reference. You just ask them to answer a series of questions, typically trying to get an emotional response out of them. So the evaluator can side by side read through the grant application. They can jump up top. They can look at attachments. All those files get embedded right in Reviewer. They can jump up to like any additional deliverables like grant reporting templates, because again, for multi-phase programs, you have to review them as they go. Those templates show up right in Reviewer. And they answer a series of questions, from good to great or thumbs up, thumbs down, good, great, ugly, whatever you can dream up. Now, behind the scenes, there is a point value associated with those choices. So the evaluator isn't concerned about allocating points. They're just using their judgment and their emotion to assign how they feel about it. And then it'll start to assign points on the back end. So for you in an operations team, you actually get these real-time leaderboards, and it shows you in real time every applicant who applied by a per bucket basis. It shows you the committee that reviewed them and then how they review them on an individual basis, total scores, averages, you name it. So for many of you, it's a really great tool to pull up for like deliberation to kind of talk through the results. Many of you may use this for the end all be all selections. I would say most people use this in a combination of all of it. They might take like their top 20 applicants and then at the bottom move them to phase 2 review, phase 3 review, final selection. They then pull this up in a board meeting, they review them, they talk about them, etc. Now, the reason why I want to focus on this though is there's some pretty interesting things that are going on. So I got Mark here. Mark scored Sheldon, who is a grantee at 12. Judge Judy scored it a 31. So a couple things come into play. My first question is going to be, okay, well, did Mark just really score this low because it was a poorly written grant application? Or maybe Mark never gives higher than like a 15. He just is a more strict or stringent judge. If that is the case, getting a 12 isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's actually quite good. However, using traditional judging and selection methodology, that means that this applicant is always going to be lower in the ranking tools. This is the difference between changing somebody's life, right? I want to reiterate that. I'm going to show you an example right now of an institution that was cutting checks to individuals based off of need. It was a highly competitive selection process because there isn't infinite money to go around. They had certain board members and individuals on their team that just overall were a bit more harsh than other people. And because of that, there were highly deserving applicants that went unfunded. Again, hopefully the passion can come across because these are real problems. So what do we do? Number one is you have to be able to identify it. And then number two, you have to be able to address it. So kind of jumping back into my slides here, I gave some examples here. I'm not going to do it again because I literally just kind of talked about that. You got two judges, Robert and Barbara. Robert just on average scores lower than Barbara. So what I want to do is we talk about averaging these out and creating a normalized result. So to help you visualize that, and again, I'll send this out so you can read through it on your own time, is we have these pretty cool, normalization reports that looks something like this. And I'm going to jump ahead to what you really care about. But basically, what happens here is it shows you on a per applicant basis. And to be very clear, this is that example I talked about. This is real data that has been redacted, where you have individuals that went unfunded who are highly deserving. But what happens, you have each individual applicant, and it'll show us on a per evaluation question, per judge basis, how they were being scored. What you really care about, though, is this green section. And what this does is it actually shows us each individual judge and what their individual judging tendencies and averages are. So again, to make this super simple, I got Judge Judy, who on average scores about a 24. I've also got Tony over here, who on average scores a 34. So if you were to use totals or averages, literally anybody that was evaluated by Judge Judy will not receive funding. That is problematic. Now that we know that, we can start to manipulate the data in real time. Don't worry, we have one-click reporting for you. But what happens now is instead of getting a 24 from Judge Judy, you now are a 1 because 24 is average, so 1 indicates average. Anybody that Judge Judy scores higher than 24, so for example, 27, is now a 1.13, right? It's 0.13 times higher than average. Conversely, anybody that she scores lower than her individual average is now like a 0.96. So now that we've been able to identify each individual judge's averages, we can then compare their average against other judges. So again, getting a 1 is, for that other example, if a judge never gives higher than a 15, that's now a 1.15, right? So you get this new results, and this is, again, how this client justifies their selection. You've got Bruce now. Bruce is your highest rated applicant with a score of 1.15. That means on average, amongst all of the judges, he scores 1.15 times higher than average, whereas Elon is almost 2/10 of a point lower than average. So again, how do I think this will be utilized? Many people use this as the end all be all selection. Many others will use this in conjunction with like real-time deliberation. We want to give you the data to make data informed decisions, but we are not going to make decisions for you. We want you to go into these meetings empowered to select the best candidates for your program. And that's going to be a combination of judging score sheets, deliberation, all that kind of fun stuff. Again, I have the chat pulled up, so any questions or comments you have for me, please do toss them in there. We're almost done, and I'll also address things at the end as well. So kind of moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is measuring impact. This seems like such a silly thing to talk about. We are awarding funding to people. Our funds are either raised, it's donated. We at some point need to go back to our communities and to our board members and to our staff and say, look, here's the impact that we had. It's a broad term because impact will be relevant and different for every one of you. You all offer different types of programs. We work with an organization in a rather large city who does funding for people of high need. Again, it could be people who need housing assistance. It might be people who need our assistance with healthcare bills. How they define success will be different than an organization providing a $3 million research grant to somebody that's trying to solve a highly contagious disease, right? That's okay. So the reason why I want to bring this up is that your overall measuring of impact will be very specific to you. You need to kind of look at your programs and using kind of SMART goals and SMART planning to identify, like, when you set out to offer a grant or offer a scholarship or whatever your use case is, why did you do this, right? Like, what keeps you up at night? What are you trying to fund and why? From there, we need to work backwards to figure out how do we define impact. And those are what we call KPIs, right? So there's key performance indicators that we need to be collecting from applicants that we can then go back to our community and to our team and say, look, here's the funding that we had, here's what we did with the money, and look at the great stuff we were able to do. Very high level, I get that. I do have kind of an example here of like how we want to hold people accountable. The reason why I bring this up though is the actual creating of a grant reporting template for you or like a dashboard is not complex whatsoever. It isn't, right? Once you know what your KPIs are, you can build these really great dashboards that you can then pull up. You can make them publicly available to show, how things are going. What's hard is powering that dashboard because you have to be collecting data from the grantees that reports back to you how funds are being utilized and what the impact that they have is. So that's where I want to take over this conversation. So we need to make sure it's extremely easy for you to hold people accountable and to submit to you the KPIs and the metrics that you need to build out those dashboards. So how do we visualize that? If the goal is to get to something like this, where you have, and this is an example, obviously, a big overarching high level, how are the funds used, the age, the gender disbursements, the performance of the different grants that we have. Again, these are all going to be unique to you. How do we get to here, right? We can't just make up these charts. This data has to get pulled from somewhere. So what I want to do is kind of walk through what the grantee experience would look like. So at least in a reviewer, we got Michael again. Michael is a recipient to a grant. You will create some type of grant reporting schedule. It could be once a quarter, it could be once a year, it could be once ever. That's again totally up to you. The idea, though, is that Michael, who already is in reviewer because he filled out his main grant application, went through judging, went through selection, will just come back in. You will notice that we also have some pretty cool communication tools as well. So you can send out like notifications that say, hey, it's time for your Q2 grant reporting template, right? We work with a city who does grant funding from the American Rescue Plan. Literally for 4.5 years, grant recipients once per month will come into our system and fill out a brand new grant reporting template. And that looks like this. So they jump up to their what I call supplemental forms, which again, if you remember earlier on is how we collected references. And they will just click add new. And again, this is all workflow specific. Obviously, those are not meant to be submitting grant reporting templates. We won't have this option. They click add new, and then they select from a list, like what type of report is it? So again, it could be like an impact report, social impact, it could be their quarterly report. These are made up examples. That example I just gave where you have people who come back once a month literally have January report, February report, and it goes January through December. They click on the month and then boom, the grant reporting template pops up. And so your grantees can save, they can log out, they can come back later. You can actually have metrics so you can track who's in progress. You can see exactly who's supposed to be filling out a grant reporting template, if they've done it or not. If they haven't done it, send them reminder messages. And then once it's been done, then come in to review it. Very common example here. Again, this is where this is an organization grant, right? So this organization receives funding for something. So again, you want to ask them for a series of questions, right? So like, what was the total amount requested? How much did you receive? What was the project start and end dates? Again, I like to ask things like, what was your stated initial goal to use with the funds? What were your actual outcomes versus what your expected outcomes would be? This again is on a some type of time-based period. Tell us more about the discrepancy between your goals and your actual outcomes. Let's talk more about some metrics. Again, it could be, this will be very unique to you, but what was your target metric versus your actual metric? Let's talk more about both qualitative and quantitative impacts. Let's talk more about budgets. So if I cut you a check for X number of dollars, how much was actually utilized? Was it a fraction of it? Do you need more money, right? What's going on? Tell us more about your successes and challenges, what's working, what's not working. And then ultimately, moving forward, what's your plan? And then in Q2, in this example, they will come back and they're going to submit another grant report that should hopefully mimic the plan that was being submitted. So now we have all this really powerful comprehensive data coming in from their initial grant application, the grant reporting templates, kind of going back to that first slide. We can now create a bunch of logic and cool custom reports that then ultimately power these comprehensive dashboards. And then from here, you can kind of dive deep into the weeds on any metrics you need. So again, really powerful things that are happening here, but the only way that this works is if we have grantees coming back and giving you the data that you need in a very digestible manner. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, because I want to make sure I have ample time for Q&A. I got about 4 minutes left that I usually give myself. So we have, 15, 20 minutes of question and answer, is a combination of both transparency and then data security and privacy. So I'm just going to talk kind of broadly about both of them. So from a transparency perspective, again, these are, I can't just reiterate enough, high impact activities. So we want to make sure that when people go to apply to a grant, there's some type of what I call proof of process in place, which is going to be some type of public statement that says, look, if you apply to a grant from our organization, this is the experience that you're going to receive. Here's the type of dates and deadlines that we have. Here's an outline of the submission process. Once we begin a review and selection, it's okay to say you're going to get reviewed randomly by X number of people. Here's the score sheets that we're going to be used. If you get selected, here's what we expect from you. So the reason why this is happening, and again, this is awful to even talk about, but we've heard from grantees or grant makers that they'll have grantees call them up and say, "Hey, I didn't get funded, but I know another company that did, and I totally think that this is bogus. You selected them because of X, Y, Z reason. You selected them because you knew you're a board member of their organization, right?" So the idea behind having a proof of process and transparency is we can actually pull it up and say, look, here's the proof of process, and then here's the actual proof in reviewer that we followed that process. Number two, and this is where I think it's more relevant, is more so for self-development. Again, there isn't infinite money to go around. If you are a grant-making organization that has 100 applicants and you fund five, how do you provide value to all 100? Those five people that got funded probably are on their way to success regardless. How do we give success to those other 95? So the general thought here, and this is very polarizing, is we can actually share back to the non-selected individuals how they were reviewed. And that's kind of what I wanted to show you is basically going back to Michael, he can come back into his profile, and then you can jump up to the evaluation section. And what you show them will be custom to you. We have some clients that are very transparent and they say, look, here's how each individual judge blinded, we redact the information, scored you. Others will say, um, here's the results. You can click into it. Let's open one up. And here's the score sheet that was filled out on your behalf. So again, they might be super transparent and show them on a per question, per judge basis, scores, comments, etc. Others will not show all of the results. They instead just show one overarching comment box. This is up to you. But the general idea is that non-selected individuals get notified, they come back into reviewer, and they have some type of raw, tangible takeaway. So that way they can go to somebody else or reapply next year with a higher chance of success. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is impacting people. So if we can give them constructive feedback that empowers them to have success in the future, that in itself is a total win. I talked earlier on about how as much as I want to make your lives easier, streamline operations, I also care equally amount about providing a great experience for the applicants. With all that said, the very last thing that I'll just kind of pull up to have in the background is data security and privacy. With these types of programs, we're collecting likely very sensitive private information. We've heard that not publicly talking about the type of security controls that are in place is actually a deterrent from applicants. People won't apply because they're concerned about where their data is going to go. So with that said, there are a lot of compliance and data security laws and different things that are happening. That's not your background. Maybe it is for some of you. You are a person trying to provide as much impact as humanly possible. You don't have the time or energy to be following GDPR law, California data privacy protection laws, etc. If you're a grant maker for individuals or for the youth, now you've got child privacy law coming into play. So don't worry about it. Leave that to the experts. Let us stay at the forefront of what's happening and let us evolve for you. I also want to talk about kind of, as you're vetting different types of tools or vendors, whether or not that's us or somebody else, the key thing that you're looking for is what I would consider is like SOC 2 Type 2 certification. It really is like the industry gold standard for data security and privacy. You might have your own kind of vetting processes, but that's kind of, also don't just ask people if they are SOC 2, get their report right. Let's prove it. Because the reason why I bring that up is you might have multiple platforms that you're using. I'm not going to use industry or different company names, but you might have a general submission form. You might have some type of general database, some type of general XYZ. You might be using email, and each one of them in their own right might be really great tools, right? They might be highly secure, data privacy, security, compliant, but used in conjunction with one another, it may not be. So, for example, you might use, let's just pretend that you use reviewer, right? The gold standard for security. And you're collecting things like social security numbers. Great, we knock it out of the park. But if you're exporting that data and then shipping it off into a spreadsheet to your review team, that all goes out the window. So I just want to kind of point out that we are passionate about everything we do here, but you also need to make sure that you have kind of the infrastructure in place. So